The void between stars held no secrets from Magos Dominus Atheon 927. For 6 centuries, his augmented senses had catalogued the patterns of cosmic radiation, gravitational anomalies, and warp-tide fluctuations that defined the borders of imperial space. From his observatory spire on Forge World Helios Secundus, he monitored the darkness beyond the halo stars with cold machine precision. Yet tonight, something unprecedented registered in his coitator implants. A disturbance. Not warporn, not xenos known to imperial records, but something that defied classification. Anomaly bears hallmarks of artificial construct. He anoned to his attendant tech priests, his voice box rendering binary into Gothic. Configuration unknown. Movement pattern suggests purpose. The primary or array hummed as it tracked the anomaly. A cubic structure of immense proportions that violated the emptiness between systems. No emissions matched known patterns, no identifiable drive signatures, no response to Mechanicus hails, only steady, implacable advance toward the Forge World. Magos. The anomaly has altered course. Reported a junior adept Mechandrites writhing in agitation. It accelerates toward the outer forges. Through augmented eyes, Atheon witnessed the cube's approach, its surface etched with technological patterns unlike any human or Xenos design. Something ancient stirred in what remained of his organic mind. Not fear, for such weakness had been excised centuries ago. Curiosity, the purest emotion permitted to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Alert the Titan legions, he commanded. Awaken the Qatari maniples. Inform the orbital batteries. As the cubic vessel breached the outer defense sphere, a single transmission washed across all Vox frequencies, all data networks, all coitator systems. We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your vessels. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile. Atheon's logic engines processed the declaration with cold calculation. The arrogance of the claim, the presumption of surrender, the technological heresy implicit in the statement. The Omnissiah protects. Atheon responded, activating the Forge World's ancient defense grid. Helios Secundus stands eternal. Your destruction is imminent. Orbital batteries erupted with magnificent fury as lance beams converged on the approaching cube. Void shields flared around the Forge World's orbital platform's Ascari regiments mobilized on the surface below. Atheon watched impassively as the first salvo struck the intruder. The energy dispersed across the cube surface, seemingly absorbed rather than deflected. Damage was minimal, localized, and then before his augmented eyes the damaged sections began to regenerate. Metal flowing like liquid circuitry rewiring itself. Adaptation detected. Atheon noted his binary, betraying no emotion, even as his organic brain registered a flicker of concern. Xenos technology demonstrates unprecedented repair capabilities. The cube responded, not with conventional weapons, but with a pale greenish beam that swept across the nearest defense platform. Where it touched, systems failed. Mechanicus Adept screamed as their augmentics turned against them, mechadendrites twisting and writhing beyond control. The beam continued its inexorable sweep, and Atheon witnessed the impossible. The fallen tech priests rose again, but changed. Their robes torn away, their flesh grey and mottled, their augmentics twisted into new configurations. Their movements became synchronized, purposeful in a way that violated all protocols of the Mechanicus hierarchy. Alert all forces, Atheon commanded, his voice steady despite the data flooding his systems. Xenos threat demonstrates capability to corrupt machine spirits and biological components simultaneously. Designate threat-level extremists. Across Helios Secundus, the forges roared to life. Ancient war machines stirred from centuries of dormancy. The Titan Legion, Mars triumphant, awakened its god machines. Mighty warlords and reavers rising from their sanctuaries as tech priests performed the rites of awakening. Columns of Qatari marched in perfect synchronization. Their radium carbines and galvanic rifles charged for war. The cube descended through the upper atmosphere, its massive bulk defying gravity. Smaller craft detached from its surface, geometrically perfect spheres that streaked toward the primary forges. Defense batteries tracked them, obliterating dozens, but more kept coming. In the command spire, Atheon interfaced directly with the Forgeworld's defense network. Through 1,000 eyes he watched the first ground contact. The spheres touched down amid the sprawling manufacturing districts. their hulls split open, disgorging figures that moved with mechanical precision. They had been humanoid once. Now they were amalgams of flesh and machine, their skin ashen grey, their bodies adorned with crude implants. But unlike the sacred union of flesh and machine celebrated by the Mechanicus, these were abominations. There was no reverence in their construction, no ritual purity, no homage to the Omnissiah, only cold, brutal efficiency. Forces engaged immediately, galvanic rifles discharged, their rounds punching through the intruders with brutal efficiency. Radium weapons bathed the enemy in deadly radiation. For a moment it seemed the defense would hold. The invaders fell by the dozens, their bodies riddled with holes or glowing with radioactive death. Then they rose again. Wounds sealed themselves. Damaged components reconfigured and worse. With each engagement they changed. After the first volley of radium weapons, the next wave of invaders displayed crude radiation shielding. After arc rifles discharged their deadly electricity, subsequent attackers manifested insulated components. They adapt, Atheon observed, his logic engines working at maximum capacity to process the tactical implications. Each weapon proves effective only once. Each strategy yields diminishing returns. The battle for the outer forges was lost in hours. The invaders, which Atheon now classified as Borg, based on their initial transmission, moved with singular purpose. They did not kill indiscriminately. Instead, they captured tech priests, servitors, and Qitari alike. Each captive was subjected to a grotesque procedure, nanoscopic probes injected directly into the flesh. Those taken rose again as new soldiers for the invading force, their knowledge and capabilities assimilated in the heart of the Principal Forge Temple. Atheon convened an emergency conclave of the senior Magi. Their voices rose in a cacophony of binary and Gothic fear and fascination wearing in their augmented minds. "They violate the sacred union of man and machine," declared Maros Biology Esri, her voice trembling with rare emotion. "It is tech heresy of the highest order, yet their technological integration demonstrates principles we have sought for millennia," countered Mosnus Val, his optical augmentics whirring as they focused. The speed of adaptation, the seamless merging of disparate systems, irrelevant, Atheon cut through the debate. The Forge world stands on the precipice of destruction. All theoretical concerns are secondary to survival. On the Holith projector, the tactical situation deteriorated by the minute. The Borg advanced in geometric patterns, establishing nodes and conduits throughout the captured territories. Each fallen district became part of their infrastructure, manufacture repurposed to unknown ends. Most disturbing was the fate of the captured Forge priests. Their extensive knowledge accumulated over centuries of service to the Omnissiah now served the invaders. "I have authorized the Titan Legion to engage," Atheon informed the conclave. "The god machines will stem the tide while we implement more permanent countermeasures." Outside the armoured walls of the Principal Forge, the earth trembled. Mighty war horns sounded as the Titans of Mars triumphant marched to war. Leading the formation was the warlord Titan Omnissiah's Fury, its plasma annihilator glowing with barely contained energy, its volcano cannon primed for destruction. Alongside it strode two Reaver Titans, their Gatling blasters already spinning, void shields shimmering around their massive forms. The Borg cube had established a primary ground base, a sprawling complex of geometric precision that pulsed with alien energies. Countless drones moved among its structures, their purpose inscrutable to Imperial observers. As the Titans approached, the cube itself descended further, now hovering directly above the complex. "In the name of the Omnissia and the God Emperor of mankind, I consign you to oblivion," voxed Prince Maximus Darien from within Omnissia's fury. The Titan's massive foot crushed a cluster of Borg drones. The machine spirit's anger transmitted through its movements. The Warlord Titan raised its plasma annihilator and fired. A sun was born between the god machine and the cube, a rowing mass of energy that struck with apocalyptic force. The blast engulfed a section of the cube, vaporizing its outer structure. For a brief moment, victory seemed possible. Then the impossible happened. The cube's damaged section began to regenerate, but differently. The new growth incorporated materials that resembled the ceramite and adamantium of Imperial construction. More disturbing still, energy readings indicated the cube was now generating a crude version of void shield technology. "They have assimilated our defense systems," reported a tech priest, horror evident despite his emotionless vocal implants. The machine god preserve us. They learn from every engagement. The Borg responded to the Titan's attack, not with conventional weapons, but with a focused transport beam. Dozens of drones materialized on the Titan's sacred hull, attaching themselves to its armor plates. Warning runes flashed across Athion's display as the smaller Reaver Titan, Mechanicus Vindictum, reported system intrusions. Unknown technology is compromising the Mechanicus Vindictum's machine spirit. Came the desperate Vox transmission. Tech priests are unable to maintain connection with the God Machine. The Borg entities are bypassing all security protocols. Through the Forge World surveillance network, Athion witnessed the fall of a Titan. The Reaver's movements became jerky, uncoordinated, as the battle between machine spirit and Borg technology raged within its sacred systems. Then, with terrifying finality, the God Machine's eyes changed colour. The traditional red, replaced by a sickly green glow. The Titan turned its weapons upon its companion, Gatling blaster rounds, hammering against the void shields of Omnissiah's fury. The machine spirit has been corrupted. Athion stated the implications cascading through his tactical algorithms. If they can turn our own war machines against us, no conventional defense will succeed. As if to punctuate his assessment, the hijacked Titan's void shields suddenly expanded, engulfing a nearby skittery manipule. When the energy field receded, the troops rose as Borg drones, their implants and weapons subsumed into the collective technology. In the command spire, Athion made his decision. Initiate Protocol Terminus. The Forge must not fall intact. Protocol Terminus was the most desperate measure available to a Forge world. The systematic destruction of all technology that could not be evacuated, the corrupting of all data repositories, and in the final analysis, the detonation of the Forge's plasma reactors. Better to reduce the planet to molten slag than allow its secrets to fall into enemy hands. But even as the protocol was activated, Athion knew it was already too late. The Borg had seized control of 2 of the 5 primary reactor complexes. Their drones were penetrating the data vaults faster than the tech priests could purge them. And now, a new horror emerged. The captured tech priests, their knowledge of the Forge's systems absolute, were directing the Borg to the most valuable and dangerous technologies. We require additional forces, Athion stated, sending the emergency astropathic signal that no Forge world wished to transmit. Request immediate inquisitorial intervention and space marine support. Xenos threat of unprecedented nature. A Imperator, a Omnissiah. The message burst into the warp, carrying with it compressed data packets detailing the Borg threat. As the astropathic choir collapsed from the strain, Athion turned his attention back to the desperate ground war. The surviving Titans had withdrawn to defensive positions around the principal forge, their weapons firing continuously to hold back the tide of drones. "How much time have we purchased?" asked Magos biologist Ezrath, her voice subdued. "Insufficient," Athion replied, his logic engines calculating probabilities with cold precision. "Estimate complete Forge world subjugation within 72 hours, unless external intervention occurs." He turned his attention to the laboratory spaces beneath the command spire. There, the finest tech priests worked frantically to understand the samples of Borg technology, recovered in the early stages of the battle. If they could not win through force of arms, perhaps knowledge would provide salvation. The nanot probes defy conventional analysis, reported Archmagositor Voran. His multiple optical units focused on the microscopic display. They operate on principles that suggest both biological and technological components, yet they are neither. They are something else entirely. "Can they be neutralized?" Athion demanded. "Theoretically, the probes appear vulnerable to certain energy wavelengths. We have also observed that they struggle to assimilate systems protected by certain warding sequences. The rituals of activation and machine spirit propitiation seem to create a temporary barrier to their intrusion." A flicker of possibility ignited in Athion's analytical engines. The rites and rituals of the Mechanicus, long dismissed by outsiders as mere superstition, contained ancient wisdom from the dark age of technology. If those rites could be weaponized, adapted into a defensive algorithm. "Focus all research efforts on developing a counteragent based on the sacred algorithms," Athion commanded. "I will lead the tactical defense personally." Donning his full battle regalia for the first time in centuries, Athion descended to the front lines. His ancient form was a masterpiece of Mechanicus artistry, a seamless blend of human intellect and machine perfection. Power fields hummed around his ornate axe. its edge capable of slicing through the densest materials. His integrated weapon systems included a Volkite charger, its thermal beam capable of reducing targets to atoms. At the primary defensive line, Thekatari held their positions with machine-like discipline. Cohorts of gleaming battle servitors stood ready, their weapon arms trained on the approaches. Tech priests moved among the defenders, anointing weapons with sacred oils, chanting the litanies of accuracy and destruction. The Borg advance was visible now, a tide of grey-skinned drones moving with perfect coordination. They did not run or charge. They simply walked forward, implacable, unstoppable. Energy weapons fire erupted from the Imperial lines, cutting down the first wave. But as Atheon had witnessed before, each successive wave showed adaptations. "Rotate weapons protocols," he commanded, his voice carrying to all defenders through their augment implants. "Maintain unpredictable attack patterns. The enemy adapts to consistency." The battle joined in earnest. Rangers fired with unerring accuracy, each shot finding a drone's vital components. Vanguard troops advanced under the cover of rad weapons, the invisible energy eating away at the Borg's biological components. Sicarian infiltrators darted through the combat zone, their taser goats delivering lethal electrical charges to the enemy. For his part, Atheon moved like a destructive whirlwind despite his ancient frame. His axe cleaved through drones, the power field disrupting their nanoprobes and preventing regeneration. His Volkite charger reduced entire groups to ash. Yet for each drone that fell, two more advanced to take its place. Magos Dominus Vox Kitari Alpha. They are adapting to the sacred Latines. The incantation of percussive maintenance no longer disrupts their coordination. Atheon processed this information with growing concern. The litanies and rites were being analysed and countered just as their weapons had been. The Borg were learning the secrets of the Mechanicus, not just their technology, but their traditions, their sacred knowledge. A drone lunged at Atheon, its arm transformed into a spinning saw that sparked against his armour's energy field. He severed the limb with a precise strike, then impaled the creature through its chest cavity. As he withdrew his weapon, the drone's remaining hand clasped his arm, and Atheon felt something unprecedented. An intrusion, not physical, but digital. The drone was attempting to interface directly with his augmentics to access his data core. For the first time in centuries, Atheon felt fear, a remnant emotion from his distant human past. With a surge of will, he activated his most ancient defense protocol, the Litany of Purging, a code sequence so old it predated the Horus Heresy, passed down from Magos to Magos as a last resort against scrap code infection. The drone convulsed as the litany invaded its systems, disrupting the nanoprobe's coordination. It collapsed, truly dead at last. Atheon staggered back, his systems running emergency diagnostics, the attempted intrusion. It had been stopped, but the implications were staggering. The Borg weren't just assimilating technology and biology. They were assimilating knowledge, culture, tradition, the very essence of what made the Adeptus Mechanicus what it was. "Fall back to secondary positions," he ordered, noting with dismay that their losses were approaching critical levels. "Implement Protocol Obscura." As Thekatari executed a perfect fighting withdrawal, Atheon received an urgent communication from the research laboratories. Archmagos Gentor Voron's voice carried an unfamiliar tone. Excitement. "Magos Dominus. We have made a breakthrough. The Borg nanoprobes show a critical vulnerability when exposed to certain warp energies, not direct contact which they can adapt to, but specific harmonics that resonate with the barriers between real space and the immaterium." Atheon processed this information rapidly, elaborate. In simple terms, their collective consciousness operates on principles similar to a localized noosphere. It allows them to share information and adapt quickly. But this connection makes them vulnerable to certain types of interference. We believe a properly calibrated warp resonator could disrupt their collective, rendering them temporarily incapable of adaptation. For the first time since the invasion began, Atheon's probability engines calculated a non-zero chance of victory. Begin production immediately. Divert all available resources. But time was running short. The secondary defensive line was already under pressure, and the Borg cube had begun a new strategy. Rather than direct assault, it was now emitting a signal that interfered with the Forge World's new sphere, the digital communication network that linked all Mechanicus technology. Servitors malfunctioned, turning on their masters. Automated defense systems targeted friendly units. The machine spirit of Helios Secundus itself was under attack. In orbit above the Forge world, salvation arrived. The battle barge Eternal Vengeance translated from the warp, its massive form bristling with weapon batteries. The Black Templars chapter of the Eternal Crusade had answered the call. Drop pods struck through the atmosphere, each carrying warriors whose hatred for the alien knew no bounds. On the command bridge of the Eternal Vengeance, Marshal Gottfried surveyed the tactical display with cold fury. The cube vessel dominated the projection, its impossible size and configuration, an affront to Imperial sensibilities. The Mechanicus speaks truth. He growled to his command squad. This Xenos threat is unlike any we have faced. It corrupts not just the flesh, but the spirit. It turns the Omnissiah's gifts against his servants. Then we shall cleanse it with fire and faith, replied Chaplain Morid, his skull helm concealing any expression, his Croceus Arcanum crackling with energy. The Emperor protects. The first wave of Space Marines impacted directly at the front lines. Drop pods slammed into the ground with earth-shattering force, their doors blasting outward to reveal transhuman warriors in gleaming black armor. Bolters roared, their mass-reactive shells detonating inside Borg drones with devastating effect. Chainswords revved as the Black Templars charged into close combat, their righteous fury a palpable force. Unlike the Methodicali, the Space Marines fought with controlled savagery. Each warrior was a perfect storm of violence, decades or centuries of combat experience guided by the finest weapons and armor the Imperium could provide. Where Thekatari had been overwhelmed by the Borg's adaptations, the Astartes responded with unpredictable fury, changing tactics, weapons, and approaches faster than the collective could process. Marshal Gottfried himself led the assault on a Keyborg installation, a structure that had once been a Mechanicus shrine, the massive Space Marine. His armor adorned with purity seals and battle honors cut through drones with his master-crafted power sword. Each strike was precise, devastating, guided by transhuman reflexes and centuries of battlefield experience. For the Emperor and Dawn, he roared as he decapitated a drone that had once been a tech priest, its mechondrites now twisted into Borg appendages. Suffer not the alien to live. The Black Templars' intervention bought precious time, but Atheon knew it was not enough. The Space Marines, for all their skill and fury, were still limited by their numbers. The Borg seemed infinite, each fallen drone replaced by two more, and with each engagement they adapted, their resistance to bolter fire increasing, their ability to counterchain weapons improving. In his command spire, Atheon received word that the warp resonator was ready for deployment. The device was a masterpiece of desperate innovation, combining ancient Mechanicus technology with theoretical principles derived from studying the Borg nanot probes. Its power source was a controlled fragment of warp energy, contained within multiple layers of wards and shielding. Deploy the resonator at the primary forge complex, Atheon ordered. All forces will converge to protect it until activation is complete. The device was massive, requiring a dedicated transport and an escort of Karian Space Marines. As it moved through the war-torn streets of Heliosundis, the Borg seemed to sense its importance. Drones converged from all directions, sacrificing themselves by the hundreds to slow its progress. Atheon joined the escort personally, his ancient form moving with purpose alongside the transhuman warriors of the Black Templars. Marshal Gottfried acknowledged him with a curt nod. The traditional rivalry between Ertes and Mechanicus set aside in the face of existential threat. "Your device had better work, Magos," the Marshal stated, his voice hard. "The chapter has sacrificed many brothers to buy this opportunity. The probability of success is non-zero." Atheon replied, his binary can't unable to express the complex calculations behind his statement. The resonator must reach the central forge shrine. From there, its effect will propagate through the forge world's noosphere, carried by the same network the Borg have been exploiting. The final approach to the shrine was a gauntlet of horror. The Borg had transformed the surrounding districts into something alien. The clean lines of Mechanicus architecture warped into organical-looking inconduits and nodes. The ground itself seemed alive with nanoprobes, the metal decking shifting and flowing. Drones emerged from hidden compartments, their forms increasingly diverse as they assimilated more of the Forge world's denizens and technology. Forward Brothers called Chaplain Morid, his Croceus Arcanum smashing a drone to component atoms. The alien defiles the Omnissiah's realm. We are his vengeance. The Black Templars charged into the mass of drones, creating a corridor for the resonator transport. Bolt fire created a symphony of destruction, each round finding its mark with transhuman accuracy. Yet even these superhuman warriors began to tire as the Borg pressed from all sides, their adaptation now so advanced that only direct head-shot with bolt rounds proved consistently fatal. Atheon fought alongside them, his ancient weapon systems purging drones with mechanical precision. A squad of skittery rangers provided covering fire, their galvanic rifles set to maximum charge. The air crackled with energy discharges, superheated plasma, and the distinctive sound of bolt rounds detonating. Then disaster struck. A new form of Borg drone appeared, larger than the others, its body incorporated components recognizable as Space Marine armor. With horror, Atheon realized the truth. They had assimilated fallen estates. "Abomination!" snarled Marshal Gottfried, his power sword raised in challenge. "You dare corrupt the Emperor's finest!" The assimilated Space Marine moved with terrible speed, still possessing the enhanced reflexes and strength of an Astartes, but guided by the cold intelligence of the collective. It engaged Godfrey directly, its arm transformed into a whirring blade that sparked against the Marshal's power sword. "Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own." It spoke, its voice a horrific blend of Space Marine vox and Borg modulation. "Resistance is futile." "The Emperor's will is never futile," Gottfried replied through gritted teeth, his sword slashing in a diagonal arc that severed the drone's weapon arm. To the Marshal's shock, the limb began to regenerate immediately, nanoprobes working at accelerated speed to rebuild the damaged components. The drone pressed its attack, now wielding a crude power field generator that countered Gottfried's blade. Atheon analysed the situation with cold logic. The resonator was still 100 members from its destination. The escort forces were being overwhelmed. The assimilated Space Marines represented a quantum leap in the Borg's combat capabilities. The probability of success dropped precipitously with each passing second. Decision protocols activated in his ancient mind. There was only one path forward with non-zero probability of success. He turned to the skittery Alpha commanding the resonator transport. "Activate final contingency," he ordered. "I will ensure the resonator reaches its destination without waiting for acknowledgement." Atheon interfaced directly with his physical form's control systems, ancient locks disengaged, safety protocols were overridden. The power coursing through his mechanical body increased tenfold, his systems glowing with dangerous energy. Marshal got freed. He voxed to the embattled Space Marine leader, "Withdraw your forces to minimum safe distance. Prepare for resonator activation on my signal." The Black Templar commander, still locked in combat with the assimilated Astartes, glanced at the Margos with sudden understanding. Brothers fall back by squads, tactical withdrawal to position Alpha. As the Space Marines began their disciplined retreat, Atheon advanced. His mechanical body, now operating beyond all safety parameters, moved with uncanny speed. His axe became a blur of motion, its power field leaving trails of blue energy as it carved through drones. His Volkite charger fired continuously, its heat sinks glowing white-hot with the strain. The resonator transport followed in his wake, its Skari crew firing precisely at any drone that threatened their path. They reached the steps of the Forge Shrine, a massive pyramid structure that housed the heart of the Forge World's noosphere connection. "Deploy here," Atheon commanded, his voice box emitting static as his systems approached critical overload. "Begin activation sequence." Thekitari worked with mechanical efficiency, positioning the resonator at the exact coordinates specified. Atheon stood guard, his weapon systems destroying any drone that approached. His internal chronometer counted down the seconds until activation, each moment an eternity as his overtaxed systems began to fail. The Borg response was immediate and overwhelming. Drones converged from all directions, sacrificing themselves by the dozens to reach the resonator. The cube itself shifted position in orbit, its energy readings spiking as it prepared some new countermeasure. "Activation imminent," reported Thekitari Alpha, his voice flat despite the desperation of their situation. 30 seconds to full charge. Atheon's tactical systems calculated that they would not last 30 more seconds. The drones were too numerous, their adaptations too advanced. The resonator would be overwhelmed before it could activate. Logic engines presented a single solution. Probability of success, marginal cost, absolute. "Clear the area," he ordered Thekatari. "Return to Marshal Gottfried's position. The Omnissiah protects." As the Qatari withdrew, Athion stepped onto the resonator platform. His ancient hands interfaced directly with the device's control systems, bypassing safety protocols and isolation wards. He established a direct connection between his own power core and the resonator's warp fragment containment. Warning messages flooded his consciousness. Critical system failure imminent. Power core breach predicted. Survival probability approaching 0. Athion dismissed the warnings. His existence was irrelevant. The Forge world's survival, the containment of the Borg threat. These were the only variables that mattered. The drones reached the platform, clawing at his armoured form. Nanoprobes attempted to penetrate his systems to assimilate his vast knowledge and technological capabilities. They found only overloading circuits, components pushed beyond all tolerances, and a single command sequence repeating through every system. The litany of percussive maintenance, oldest and simplest of the Mechanicus rites, transformed into a weapon of last resort. "We are the Adeptus Mechanicus," Athion broadcast on all frequencies, his voice reaching not just the drones but the cube in orbit. "We are the guardians of knowledge. We are the servants of the Omnissiah. We do not yield. We do not forget. We do not forgive." His power core breached containment, energy flooding directly into the resonator. The warp fragment suddenly overcharged, emitted a pulse of impossible energies. Reality itself seemed to shudder as the pulse expanded outward, carried through the Nosphere network that permeated every structure on Helioscundus where it touched. Borg systems failed. The collective consciousness that bound the drones together fragmented. Each unit suddenly isolated. Nanot probes disintegrated, their molecular structure unraveled by energies that existed partially in real space and partially in the immaterium. In orbit, the cube vessel convulsed as the pulse reached it through its connection to the ground. Forces. Sections of its structure collapsed inward as the collective consciousness that maintained its integrity shattered. Secondary explosions rippled across its surface as assimilated. Imperial technology reacted catastrophically to the resonator's energies. At the epicenter, Magos Dominus Athion 927 ceased to exist as a discrete entity. His physical form was consumed by the very energies he had unleashed. His data core containing centuries of accumulated knowledge was obliterated. Yet in the final Nancons, as his consciousness faced dissolution, he experienced something unprecedented. Clarity from the command bridge of the eternal vengeance. Marshal Gottfried had witnessed the destruction of the Borg cube. The massive vessel broke apart, sections spinning away into the void, secondary explosions continuing to consume what remained. On the surface below, the drone forces collapsed, their coordinated assault reduced to individual units stumbling in confusion. "The Margot succeeded," reported Chaplain Morid, his skull helm turned toward the tactical display. "The Xenos threat is neutralized." Gottfried had nodded grimly at great cost. "Signal the chapter. The cleansing begins now. No trace of this xenotechnology can be permitted to survive." In the days that followed, the Black Templars implemented protocol purification with methodical thoroughness. Every drone was destroyed, its components melted down in plasma furnaces. Every structure tainted by Borg technology was demolished, the rubble pulverized and scattered. Every data repository that had interfaced with the collective was wiped and consecrated anew. The surviving tech priests led by Magos biologist Ezreth, now elevated to Magos Dominus by the necessity of succession, supervised the purification with cold determination. The knowledge gained from studying the Borg was too dangerous to preserve in its raw form, yet too valuable to discard entirely. "We will encode what we have learned in the most ancient ciphers," Ezreth declared to the assembled conclave, "buried beneath layers of symbolism and ritual, accessible only to those with the wisdom to use it safely. This is what Athion would have wanted." The final act of purification came a month after the battle. Marshal Gottfried and his command squad stood alongside Ezra in the ruins of the Central Forge Shrine. Before them was a simple adamantium plinth bearing a single inscription in binary Kent. "What does it say?" asked the Marshal, his enhanced eyes unable to decipher the complex sequence. "Knowledge is burden," Ezra translated. "Wisdom is knowing when to set it down." As the Black Templars prepared to depart, their mission of purification complete, an astropathic message arrived from distant Terra. The Inquisition had reviewed the data concerning the Borg incursion. Effective immediately, the entire Helios sector was placed under inquisitorial quarantine. All information regarding the Xenos designated Borg was classified at the highest level. "They fear what they do not understand," Ezra observed as she read the decree to Marshal Godfrieded. "With good reason," the Space Marine replied, his expression grim beneath his helmet. "This enemy was unlike any I have faced in 3 centuries of service. They did not seek to destroy or conquer. They sought to convert, to transform, to remake in their image. In that they are not unlike the ruinous powers themselves. Then we are fortunate they came here first," Ezrith said, her augment eye focusing on the distant stars, where they could be met by those who understand both the machine and the dangers it presents when corrupted. The battle barge Eternal Vengeance departed Helios Secundus, its mission complete, but its vigilance undiminished. Marshal Godfrieded ordered continuous scanning of the void beyond the sector borders. The Xenos threat had been contained, but the Space Marine's instincts honed over centuries of war warned that this victory might be temporary. In the deepest vault of the reconstructed Forge Temple, behind layers of security and ritual protection, a single sample remained. Not Borg technology itself, but a record of its principles, encoded in a language that combined the most archaic forms of binary K with ritual symbolism, a warning for future generations should the threat return. But in the void beyond the Astronomican's light, beyond even the reach of the Imperium's most distant outposts, something stirred. A sphere smaller than the cube that had assaulted Helios Secundus drifted through the endless dark. Its systems operated at minimum capacity, conserving energy, processing the vast amount of data acquired during the brief contact with the Imperium of Man. Within its core memory banks, a single directive repeated: adapt and survive. The consciousness that guided it was diminished, fragmented by the warp resonator's pulse, but not destroyed. It analyzed the encounter, calculating probabilities, formulating new strategies. The Imperium had proven more resilient than anticipated. Their technology, while primitive in many aspects, contained elements that defied conventional assimilation. Their organizational structure built around faith and ritual, as much as science and reason, created unexpected resistance to the collective consciousness. Most concerning were the readings taken during the final moments on Helios Secundus. The resonator had channeled energies that existed partially outside normal space-time. The drone designated 6 of 10 once Maros biologics had transmitted data, suggesting these energies originated from an alternate dimension. The natives called the warp. This warranted further investigation. The collective consciousness determined that direct confrontation was inefficient. A new approach was required: infiltration, observation, targeted assimilation of key knowledge repositories, and there was something else. During the brief neural connection with the humans, designated Space Marines, the collective had glimpsed entities that existed within this warp dimension. Powerful consciousnesses that operated on principles similar to the collective yet fundamentally alien. These gods represented both threat and opportunity. Their existence suggested new forms of perfection, new modes of consciousness that might be assimilated. The sphere adjusted its course, heading toward a remote Imperial listening post. Its new strategy would require patience, centuries perhaps, but the collective consciousness was eternal. And in the mathematics of existence, resistance was indeed futile, not because of overwhelming force, but because of inevitable probability. Adaptation would continue, perfection would be achieved, the galaxy would eventually be assimilated. In the dimly lit chambers of the inquisitorial fortress on Titan, Lord Inquisitor Hezekiah Voss studied the reports from Helios Secundus with growing concern. The picked recordings of the Borg drones, the technical analyses of their adaptive capabilities, the testimony of the Space Marines who had faced them in combat, all pointed to a threat unlike any the Imperium had previously catalogued. They operate as a single entity, he observed to his gathered conclave. Not as the Tyranids do through synaptic control, but through shared consciousness. Each drone both independent and part of the whole. Inquisitor Mara Kal, a radical of the Ordo Xenos known for her controversial research into alien technology, leaned forward. The technological implications are staggering. Their ability to assimilate and adapt almost instantaneously, to incorporate desperate technologies into a cohesive whole. If we could understand these principles, that path leads to heresy, interrupted Inquisitor Thorn, his augment eye whirring as it focused. The Mechanicus nearly lost an entire Forge world to these abominations. Any attempt to utilize their technology risks similar contamination. Voss raised a hand, silencing the debate. The threat has been contained, but not eliminated. The Mechanicus resonator destroyed the primary vessel and its ground forces, but we cannot assume this represents their entire species. Precautions must be taken. He activated a holith projector displaying a map of the galaxy, with the Helios sector highlighted. I am implementing protocol vigilance. Early warning systems will be enhanced throughout the sector. Any vessel or signal matching Borg configurations is to be reported immediately and engaged with maximum force. And what of the knowledge gained? Asked Cal, her expression carefully neutral. The Mechanicus has preserved some technical data. Should it not be studied so we might better defend against future incursions? Voss considered this carefully. The Inquisition's eternal dilemma. Knowledge was power, but some knowledge was too dangerous to possess. The Borg represented technology that could corrupt not just the flesh, but the machine spirits themselves. Yet to discard all understanding would leave them vulnerable should the threat return. Limited research will continue. He decided finally under strictest quarantine protocols with multiple redundant security measures. Inquisitor Cal, you will oversee this effort. Remember that your purpose is to understand how to destroy these Xenos more effectively, not to replicate their abominable technology. The Conclave concluded, its members departing to implement the Lord Inquisitor's directives. But Voss remained, staring at the holithic representation of the galaxy, its countless stars representing uncounted worlds, each vulnerable to threats from without and within. The Emperor protects, he whispered, the ritual words bringing little comfort as he contemplated the vast darkness between stars and what might be watching from those depths. 5 standard years passed. On Helios Secundus, the scars of the Borg incursion began to fade. The Adeptus Mechanicus, with their customary efficiency, had rebuilt the damaged forges, reconsecrated the defiled shrines, and resumed the endless production of war material for the Imperium's countless conflicts. Margos Dominus Ezri, once a specialist in biological systems, now found herself responsible for the spiritual and technological health of an entire Forge world. She had adapted to her new role with the same methodical precision she had once applied to genetic analysis, but the burden weighed heavily on her partially mechanical frame. In her private sanctum, surrounded by data feeds and monitoring systems, she reviewed the latest reports from the research team studying the encoded records of Borg technology. Progress was slow, deliberately so. Each insight was scrutinized, each potential application evaluated for risk of contamination or corruption. Margos Dominus came the voice of her principal assistant, a young tech priest named Don. The delegation from Mars has arrived. Fabricator Locom Zagreus requests your presence at the landing platform. Ezrath acknowledged the message with a binary can of affirmation. The visit was expected, though not entirely welcome. The Martian priesthood had taken great interest in the Borg incursion, their curiosity overwhelming even their traditional caution. At the principal landing platform, Ezra greeted the Fabricator Locom with all the proper rituals and protocols. Zagreus was an imposing figure, his body almost entirely mechanical, only the slightest traces of his original human form visible beneath layers of sacred technology. Helios Secundus appears to have recovered well, Zagreus observed, his voice box rendering perfect High Gothic. The Omnissiah's will is made manifest through your efforts. The Forge world endures as it always has, Ezra replied, leading the delegation toward the primary shrine complex, though the cost was great indeed. The loss of Magos Dominus Atheon was felt even on Mars. His research into Architect integration was most promising. Zagreus's optical units focused on Ezra with uncomfortable intensity. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. The Martian priesthood is concerned about certain aspects of your research into the Xenos technology. Ezrath's internal cooling systems activated as her partially organic brain processed this statement. All research has been conducted according to the protocols established by the Inquisition and the High Lords of Mars. Of course, your dedication to proper procedure is not in question. Zagreus made a gesture that might have been conciliatory, but there are those among the priesthood who wonder if such research should be conducted at all. The risk of contamination of tech heresy is substantial. They had reached the central shrine, a massive pyramidal structure rebuilt to precise specifications after the Borg had defiled the original. Inside, tech priests performed the rituals of maintenance and prayer that kept the Forge World systems functioning smoothly. You have not seen what I have seen. Fabricator Locom, Ezra said, her voice low. You did not witness the Borg adaptation firsthand. Their technology represents an approach to machine consciousness that defies our understanding. If we do not study it, how can we defend against it? A compelling argument, one that has maintained your research authorization thus far. Zagreus moved to a viewing platform that overlooked the main forge complex, but recent developments have raised new concerns. Ezra felt a surge of unease in her remaining organic components. What developments? 3 days ago, an explorator vessel on the far side of the Ghoul stars reported contact with a geometrically perfect sphere of unknown origin. The vessel was lost with all hands, but not before transmitting picked captures. Zagreus extended a mechadendrite, projecting an image into the air between them. The sphere was unmistakable in its design aesthetic. The same clinical precision, the same integration of disparate technologies, the same implacable purpose evident in every line and curve. They have returned, Ezrith whispered, her augment voice unable to convey the dread that filled her. Perhaps, or perhaps, they never truly left. Zagreus deactivated the projection. The High Lords have implemented Containment Protocol Omega. A battle group has been dispatched to the region, including elements from the Imperial Navy, 3 Space Marine chapters, and a Mechanicus contingent. It will not be enough, Ezra stated with cold certainty. Conventional weapons proved ineffective against their adaptive capabilities. Only the resonator succeeded, and that technology was experimental, improvised, which is why I am here, Magos Dominus. Zagreus turned his full attention to her. Your research into the Borg technology must now focus exclusively on defensive applications. The resonator technology must be refined, weaponized, made deployable on a strategic scale. Ezrith processed this directive, calculating implications and probabilities. Such work carries significant risk. To fully understand the resonator's effect on Borg systems requires deeper analysis of their collective consciousness, their adaptation protocols. The risk is acknowledged and deemed acceptable given the alternative. Zagreus's tone had shifted, becoming harder, more authoritative. The Fabricator General has authorized Protocol Extremis for this research. You will have access to resources normally reserved for Titan production. The significance of this authorization was not lost on Ezra. Protocol Extremis represented the Mechanicus equivalent of declaring holy war, a commitment of resources and focus reserved for existential threats to the Adeptus Mechanicus itself. I will need specialized personnel, she said, her mind already constructing research frameworks and experimental protocols, Maggie with expertise in warp physics, noospheric architecture and architect integration. You will have them. The Omnissiah's finest servants will be placed under your authority. Zagreus made the sign of the cog, a rare gesture of respect. Helios Secundus resisted the Borg once. Now it must become the forge of their destruction. As the fabricator Locom and his entourage departed to inspect other aspects of the Forge world, Ezra remained in the central shrine. Her augmentic eyes focused on the sacred machine altar, where Atheon had performed his final calculations before implementing the resonator strategy. Your sacrifice bought us time, old friend, she whispered. Though no one was present to hear, I pray to the Omnissiah it was enough. In the void beyond the Ghoul stars, far from the Emperor's light, the sphere continued its patient work. The Imperial Explorator vessel had been a fortunate encounter, providing valuable data on current Imperial technology and protocols. The humans aboard had been assimilated, their knowledge added to the collective. Most valuable was a tech priest designated 4 of 7, formerly Explorator Exceltus. His understanding of Imperial warp drive technology provided crucial insights into the nature of this dimension the Imperium relied upon for faster-than-light travel. The same dimension that had proven so disruptive to Borg systems during the Helios Secundus engagement. The collective consciousness analyzed this information, correlating it with data gathered from other assimilated species across thousands of light-years of space. A pattern emerged, a consistency in how this warp dimension interacted with normal spacetime. The vulnerability could be addressed, adaptation was possible. New drones were being produced within the sphere's central manufacturing hub. Unlike the drones deployed at Helios Secundus, these incorporated specific modifications, warp shielding derived from Imperial Gellerfield technology, psychic dampening systems based on principles observed in the null humans, occasionally born within the Imperium, reinforced neural pathways that could maintain collective cohesion even when subjected to warp resonance. But the collective had learned another lesson from the defeat at Helios Secundus. Direct confrontation with the Imperium's military forces was inefficient. The Space Marines in particular represented a concentration of combat capability that required disproportionate resources to overcome. A new strategy had been formulated. Rather than open assault, the sphere would implement targeted infiltration. Key knowledge repositories would be identified and assimilated. Selected individuals with access to critical technologies would be taken. The collective consciousness would spread not as a tide of drones, but as a carefully cultivated network of sleeper agents and hidden nodes. The Imperial battle group approaching the sphere's position represented both threat and opportunity. Their technology could be assimilated, their personnel converted, their very ships turned into vectors to carry the collective deeper into Imperial space. The sphere adjusted its position, moving into the shadow of a rogue planetoid. Sensor-shrouding technologies activated, rendering it nearly invisible to Imperial or arrays, and it waited, patient as only a collective consciousness could be, for the perfect moment to begin the next phase of adaptation. Aboard the Retribution-class battleship Imperator Lux, Lord Admiral Constantine reviewed the tactical projection with growing frustration. The target area was vast, a region of space containing hundreds of star systems, many unexplored. Finding a single Xenos vessel, even one as distinctive as the reported Borg sphere, was proving problematic. "Any word from the Mechanicus vessels?" he asked his fleet astropath, a blind woman whose psychic sensitivity compensated for her lack of physical sight. "Explorator Fleet Gamma 7 reports no contact, Lord Admiral," she replied, her voice distant as she interpreted the psychic echoes of communication. "The Adeptus strike cruisers have begun sweep pattern alpha in the adjacent sectors." Constantine nodded, though the gesture was lost on the blind astropath. The Imperial response force was substantial. 3 full battle groups from Battlefleet Obscurus comprising battleships, cruisers, and attendant escort vessels. The Space Marine contingent included elements from the Ultramarines, Imperial Fists, and Iron Hands chapters, each bringing their unique combat doctrine to the hunt. The Mechanicus had contributed explorator vessels equipped with the most sensitive or arrays in the Imperium, as well as research ships carrying specialists in Xenos technology. Yet, after 3 weeks of methodical searching, they had found nothing. No trace of the reported sphere, no debris from the lost explorator vessel, not even the usual detritus of void travel that accumulates in well-travelled regions of space. Lord Admiral called his chief or officer. "We are receiving a priority transmission from explorator vessel Omnissiah's Insight. They report unusual energy readings from the Hestus Nebula bearing 17 Mark III. Set course immediately," Constantine ordered. A surge of anticipation replacing his frustration. "Alert all fleet elements, prepare boarding parties and void combat squads." The massive battleship's engines flared as it changed course, heading toward the distant nebula. Escort vessels moved in precise formation, maintaining the protective screen around their flagship. Throughout the ship, armsmen prepared for combat, checking weapons and void suits. In the chapel decks, Navy preachers led the crew in prayers for the Emperor's protection. On the bridge of the strike cruiser, Sword of Dawn, Captain Tiberius of the Imperial Fists watched the nebula grow larger in the viewports. Unlike the Navy vessels with their thousands of crew, the Astartes ship operated with brutal efficiency, its systems managed by a fraction of the personnel, but with transhuman precision. Energy signature analysis complete. Captain reported Brother Techer Invictus. The pattern matches historical records from Helios Secundus. 92% probability we have located the target. Tiberius nodded his scarred face. Impassive alert. The Battle Brothers' full combat readiness Brother Chaplain Morid will lead the primary assault team. The mention of Morid was significant. The chaplain had been present at Helios Secundus 5 years earlier, one of the few survivors of the Black Templars contingent that had helped purge the Borg from the Forge world. His first-hand experience with the enemy would be invaluable. In the ship's armory, Space Marines prepared for void combat. Massive Terminator armor was blessed and adorned by veteran brothers, the ancient suits of tactical dreadnought armor representing the peak of Imperial protection. Heavy weapons were distributed according to carefully considered tactical doctrines. Storm bolters, assault cannons, multi-melters, all designed to deliver maximum firepower in the confined spaces of ship-to-ship boarding actions. Brother Chaplain Morid stood apart, his skull helm under his arm as he offered private devotions to the Emperor. The memories of Helios Secundus remained sharp in his transhuman mind. the implacable advance of the drones, the horror of watching battle brothers fall only to rise again as corrupted abominations, the desperate final gambit of Magos Dominus Atheon. "We face the abomination again, my brothers," he addressed the assembled Space Marines, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "An enemy that seeks not to destroy our bodies, but to corrupt our very essence. That would take the Emperor's finest and turn us into mindless automatons serving a Xenos intelligence." He raised his Crosius Arcanum, the sacred weapon glowing with power. "But they will find the Sons of Dawn unbending, unyielding. Our resolve is adamantium. Our faith is our shield. The Emperor protects, and through his might we shall prevail." The Space Marines responded with a battle cry that echoed through the armory. Their transhuman voices unified in purpose and determination. They had faced countless enemies across thousands of battlefields: orcs, Eleldar, Tyranids, the forces of chaos itself. This new threat would be met with the same unwavering courage and tactical precision that had preserved the Imperium for 10,000 years. As the Imperial fleet approached the nebula, Augur Returns became increasingly confused. The natural radiation and particulate matter interfered with sensors, creating false readings and shadowed zones where detection was impossible. The fleet formation tightened, ships moving closer together for mutual protection. Aboard the Mechanicus vessel, Omnisia's Insight, Magos Explorator Vex 84 monitored the sensor feeds with growing concern. The energy signature that had drawn them to the nebula was fluctuating, changing in ways that defied logical patterns. "Anomalous readings on all bands," he reported to the Fleet Command. "The target appears to be implementing some form of sensor countermeasure. Effectiveness is significant." Before the Imperial forces could adjust their approach, the situation changed dramatically. The energy signature they had been tracking suddenly multiplied, appearing at 12 distinct points surrounding the fleet. The nebula itself seemed to shift, revealing the true nature of the trap. Not one Borg sphere, but 12. Smaller than the cube that had attacked Helios Secundus, but more numerous, more dispersed, and crucially more advanced in their technology. They emerged from the nebula's concealing clouds like predators from ambush, their systems already active, weapons targeting the surprised Imperial vessels. "Emperor, preserve us," whispered Lord Admiral Constantine as the tactical display updated to show their predicament. "All vessels, battle stations, launch fighter squadrons, prepare for defensive engagement." The void erupted in violence as the Imperial ships responded to the ambush. Lance batteries fired brilliant beams of energy that struck the Borg spheres with enough force to shatter conventional vessels. Torpedo salvos launched their plasma warheads designed to overwhelm void shields and vaporize armored hulls. The Space Marine strike cruisers moved with surprising agility for their size, positioning themselves to bring their formidable broadside batteries to bear. The Imperial Fist's vessel targeted the nearest sphere, its bombardment cannons firing mass reactive shells the size of ground vehicles, while the Iron Hands cruiser deployed boarding torpedoes, launching its battle brothers directly toward another sphere. For a moment, it seemed the Imperial forces might overcome the ambush through sheer firepower and determination. Multiple spheres showed damage from the initial barrage, their outer hulls breached, sections exposed to void. Then the adaptation began. Where lance beams had burned through hull material in the first salvo, the second found the energy partially absorbed and dispersed. Where torpedoes had detonated with devastating effect initially, subsequent hits were less effective, as if the spheres were adjusting their defensive systems in real time. They adapt more quickly than the reports indicated. Magos Explorator Vex observed his binary K betraying no emotion despite the dire implications. Helios Secundus data suggested a 15 to 20 second window before effective countermeasures. These specimens are implementing adaptations within 4 seconds. The Borg counterattack came not as conventional weapons fire but as precisely targeted technological warfare. Tractor beams locked onto smaller Imperial vessels, holding them in place, while cutting beams systematically disabled weapons and propulsion systems. Other spheres emitted electromagnetic pulses that disrupted Vox communications and targeting systems across the Imperial fleet. Most disturbing were the pale green beams that swept across several Navy frigates. Where they touched, crew collapsed, only to rise moments later as the first wave of Borg drones. The corrupted crew members turned on their shipmates, spreading nanoprobes through direct contact. Within minutes, entire sections of the affected ships were compromised. "We need to implement the resonator technology," Lord Admiral Constantine Vox to the Mechanicus vessels. The conventional assault is proving ineffective. Negative, Lord Admiral, came the response from the senior Margos. The resonator technology is not battle-ready. Preliminary tests indicate only 30% effectiveness against these adapted Borg vessels. Deployment would reveal our countermeasure without sufficient impact. On the Sword of Dawn, Captain Tiberius assessed the deteriorating situation with transhuman clarity. The ambush had been perfectly executed, suggesting a level of strategic thinking beyond what the reports from Helios Secundus had indicated. The Borg were not just adapting technologically, but tactically as well. "Brother Chaplain," he addressed Morid, who stood ready with the boarding party. "Your assessment of our current strategy." Morid's skull helm concealed any expression, but his voice carried grim determination. "The enemy has evolved, Captain. They have studied us as we have studied them, but they have not faced the full might of the Adeptuses in void combat. The boarding action must proceed, but with modified objectives. Explain." At Helios Secundus, the Magos Dominus discovered that the Borg collective consciousness was vulnerable to warp resonance. "We lack the Mechanicus device, but we carry weapons touched by the Immaterium." Morid raised his Croceus Arcanum, the sacred weapon humming with power that existed partially in real space and partially in the warp. "The force weapons of our librarians, the blessed relics carried by our champions. These may disrupt their cohesion long enough to identify a central control node." Tiberius considered this, measuring the risk against potential reward. A focused strike at the heart of one sphere. If successful, it might reveal vulnerabilities in the others. He nodded once. Decision made. "Proceed, Brother Chaplain. The Emperor protects." As the void battle intensified around them, the strike cruiser launched its assault boats. Each craft carried a squad of space marines, genetically enhanced warriors clad in armor that made them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. At their head flew the personal craft of Chaplain Morid, accompanied by Librarian Cassius, whose psychic powers could prove decisive against the technological collective. The assault boats weaved through weapons fire, their pilots executing maneuvers that would have killed unaugmented humans. Several were hit by Borg energy weapons, their systems failing as nanoprobes invaded their machine spirits. Others made it through, slamming into the hull of the primary sphere with enough force to breach its outer layers. Explosive bolts detonated, assault ramps slammed down, and the Emperor's finest charged into the nightmare interior of the Borg vessel. Bolters roared in the confined spaces, mass-reactive shells detonating inside drone bodies with devastating effect. Chainswords revved as they tore through cybernetic implants and corrupted flesh. Chaplain Morid led from the front, his Croceus Arcanum smashing drones aside with contemptuous ease. "Forward, brothers," he called, his skull helms, Vox amplifiers carrying his voice over the den of battle. The Emperor's light penetrates even this darkness. Beside him, Librarian Cassius manifested his powers, warp energy crackling around his force staff. Where it touched the Borg systems, they failed catastrophically. The psychic energies disrupting the nanoprobes in ways technology alone could not achieve. Their collective consciousness reacts to psychic intrusion, Cassius reported, his voice strained from the mental effort. "I sense confusion, adjustment, attempts to compensate. They have not encountered this form of warfare before." The Space Marines pushed deeper into the sphere, following a path that Morid indicated would lead to what the scan suggested was a central processing hub. But the Borg adapted quickly. New drones appeared, their forms modified with crude but effective countermeasures against bolter fire and close combat weapons. Shield generators protected vital systems, while weaponized limbs allowed engagement at a distance. Most concerning were the drones that seemed designed specifically to counter the Space Marines' advantages. Some moved with unnatural speed, negating the estate's transhuman reflexes. Others wielded energy weapons that could penetrate ceramite armor given sustained fire. Still others displayed primitive warp shielding that reduced the effectiveness of the Librarian's psychic attacks. "They adapt even to the Emperor's gifts," growled Sergeant Titus, his power fist crushing a drone despite its reinforced structure. "Each minute we give them teaches them more about our capabilities." "Then we must move faster," Morid replied, his Croceus smashing through a barricade of drones. "Brother Cassius, can you sense the control node?" The Librarian closed his eyes briefly, extending his psychic senses through the ship. There he pointed down a corridor where the Borg architecture seemed to concentrate, a nexus of collective thought more ordered than the surrounding chaos, but it is heavily defended. As if to confirm his words, a new form of drone appeared at the far end of the corridor. Larger than the others, its body incorporated components that were sickeningly familiar to the Space Marines. The remains of power armor, the sacred ceramite, desecrated by Borg technology. The drone had once been a battle, brother abomination. Morid's voice was cold with fury. You dare corrupt the Emperor's finest. The drone responded not with words, but with action, raising an arm that had been transformed into a facsimile of a bolter. It fired with unerring accuracy, the rounds impacting Morid's armor with enough force to stagger him despite his massive weight. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. The drone spoke, its voice, a horrific blend of voxcaster and machine. The perfection of the Adeptus estates will serve the collective. Librarian Cassius struck first, channeling psychic energy through his force staff. The warporn power struck the corrupted Space Marine like a physical blow, disrupting the Borg technology integrated into its system. The drone staggered, its movements becoming temporarily uncoordinated. Now, brothers, called Morid, charging forward with transhuman speed. The Space Marines advanced as one, their bolters firing in synchronized bursts that overwhelmed even the adapted defenses of the drone. As it fell, Morid brought his Crozius down in a final sanctifying blow. The Emperor's mercy, he announced, denied to none, even the most corrupted. With the Guardian defeated, the path to the control node lay open. The Space Marines advanced more cautiously now, aware that they were approaching the heart of the enemy vessel. The architecture around them changed, becoming more complex, more integrated. Walls pulsed with energy conduits, floors vibrated with the movement of nanoprobes. The central chamber was a study in alien geometry. Unlike the chaotic sprawl of the outer sections, here everything was precisely arranged, each component positioned with mathematical perfection. In the center floated what appeared to be a single drone, but one unlike any they had encountered before. Its body was predominantly mechanical, with only hints of its original organic nature visible. Multiple interface cables connected it to the surrounding systems, making it appear as if it were the heart of a vast technological organism, the central node. Cassius confirmed, his psychic senses probing the entity, a focal point for the collective consciousness on this vessel. As the Space Marines entered the chamber, the entity's eyes opened. They glowed with the same sickly green as all Borg technology. But there was something else there. Awareness, purpose, not the mindless execution of programming, but something approaching intelligence. Your intrusion was anticipated. It spoke, its voice resonating through multiple speakers throughout the chamber. Your tactics analyzed, your capabilities catalogued. You call yourselves Space Marines, Adeptuses, the Emperor's finest. We have assimilated enough of your kind to understand your limitations. And yet you talk instead of fight, Morid replied, his bolter trained on the entity. A curious adaptation for a species that claims efficiency as its purpose. Conversation is occasionally efficient when dealing with species that demonstrate unusual resistance to assimilation. The entity's eyes focused on the Space Marines with unnerving intensity. Your genetic modifications are of interest to us. Your psychological conditioning even more so. The concept you call faith is particularly worthy of study. Librarian Cassius stepped forward, his force staff glowing with psychic energy. Enough words. Abomination. Your corruption ends here. The entity showed no reaction to the threat. You believe you can destroy this vessel. Perhaps you can. But we are the Borg. We exist across countless ships, countless drones. The loss of one node is irrelevant. If you're so unconcerned with your destruction, why this conversation, Morid demanded, his patience wearing thin. Why not simply attack? Because we offer you an alternative. The entity's voice shifted, becoming almost reasonable. Your Imperium is failing. We have accessed your historical records, your current tactical assessments. You fight on countless fronts against enemies that cannot be defeated. The entities you call Tyranids, the force you name Chaos, the ancient race known as Necrons. Your resources dwindle, your territory contracts, your technology degrades. We offer perfection, order, unity of purpose, the biological and technological distinctiveness of all species working in harmony, an end to the endless war that consumes your existence. For a brief moment, silence fell in the chamber. The entity's words, though heretical, carried the weight of observations that every space marine present had made in the privacy of their own thoughts. The Imperium was indeed beset on all sides, fighting a war of slow attrition against enemies that seemed numberless. Then Morid laughed, the sound harsh and unyielding inside his skull helm. "You understand nothing of humanity, machine thing. It is the struggle itself that defines us. The refusal to yield even against impossible odds. The determination to stand though the galaxy itself burns around us." He raised his Croceus Arcanum, the sacred weapon humming with power. "We are the Emperor's Space Marines. We do not bargain with Xenos. We do not compromise with the alien. We bring only death to those who would corrupt his realm." The entity's expression remained unchanged, but something in its posture shifted as expected. Adaptation will continue. The chamber erupted into violence. Hidden weapon systems activated, firing energy beams that forced the Space Marines to take cover. Panels in the floor opened, allowing fresh drones to pour into the space. The entity itself rose higher, additional mechanical limbs unfolding from its body, each tipped with a different weapon. "Concentrate fire on the central node," Morid ordered, his bolter barking as he put words to action. "Brother Cassius, focus your powers on disrupting its connection to the ship systems." The Space Marines responded with disciplined fury, their bolters firing in coordinated patterns that overwhelmed localized defenses. Sergeant Titus led a flanking maneuver, his squad moving to engage the drones while Morid and Cassius focused on the central entity. The librarian channeled his psychic might, warp energy coruscating around his force staff before lashing out at the interface cables connecting the entity to the ship. Where the energy touched, systems failed, connections severed, the entity convulsed, its mechanical limbs spasming as it lost control of portions of the vessel. "Push forward," Morid commanded, seeing the momentary advantage. "The Emperor is with us." The Space Marines advanced, their bolters, never ceasing their deadly song. Mass reactive shells detonated against the entity's defensive systems, gradually overwhelming them through sheer sustained firepower. Morid himself closed to melee range, his Croceus Arcanum swinging in consecrated arcs that shattered mechanical limbs and disrupted energy fields. The entity fought with the cold precision of a machine, each attack calculated for maximum effect. Energy beams targeted weak points in the Space Marine's armor. Mechanical appendages sought to inject nanoprobes through whatever gaps they could find. But against the fury of the Emperor's finest, even its adaptive capabilities proved insufficient. Librarian Cassius delivered the decisive blow. Gathering his psychic energy into a focused lance of pure warp power, he struck at the entity's core systems. The energy bypassed physical defenses, disrupting the very patterns of thought that constituted the node's consciousness. The entity convulsed, its mechanical body thrashing as conflicting commands cascaded through its systems. The green light in its eyes flickered, dimmed, and then flared with sudden intensity. Throughout the chamber, drones collapsed as the controlling intelligence that guided them fragmented. "The node is compromised," Cassius reported, his voice strained from the psychic effort, but something unexpected is occurring. The collective consciousness is not simply failing. It island-changing before their eyes. The entity underwent a transformation, its mechanical components reconfigured, shifting into new patterns that pulsed with energy that was neither purely technological nor entirely warp-based. The green glow that characterized Borg technology was now shot through with threads of purple and blue colors associated with warp manifestation. "We must withdraw," Morid ordered, recognizing a threat beyond their current understanding. "The objective is accomplished. The sphere's controlling node is neutralized." As the Space Marines began their fighting retreat, the entity spoke one final time, its voice distorted and overlapping, as if multiple consciousnesses were speaking simultaneously. "We are becoming. Your Imperium has shown us new patterns of existence. The realm you call warp offers alternative paths to perfection. We will adapt. We will evolve. We will return." The Space Marines fought their way back to their assault boats, facing diminished resistance as the sphere systems failed without central coordination. As they launched from the dying vessel, they witnessed a phenomenon that defied explanation. The sphere was collapsing inward, not from structural failure, but as if space itself were folding around it. The warp energy introduced by Cassius's psychic attack had triggered a cascading reaction throughout the Borg systems. From the bridge of the Sword of Dawn, Captain Tiberius watched as similar effects spread to the other Borg spheres. The vessels did not explode or break apart as conventional ships would when destroyed. Instead, they seemed to phase partially out of reality, sections disappearing into what looked disturbingly like small warp rifts. "The Emperor protects," he murmured, making the sign of the Aquala. "But what have we unleashed?" In the days that followed, the Imperial fleet conducted exhaustive sweeps of the region, searching for any trace of the Borg vessels or technology. They found nothing. No debris, no radiation signatures, no indication that the spheres had ever existed. It was as if they had been completely removed from real space, leaving not even atomic particles behind. The senior command gathered aboard the Imperator Lux to assess the engagement and its implications. Lord Admiral Constantine, Captain Tiberius, representatives from the other Space Marine chapters, and the Mechanicus Explorators all contributed their observations and analyses. "The Xenos threat has been neutralized," Constantine stated, though his tone lacked conviction. "All vessels destroyed with acceptable losses to Imperial forces." Neutralized is not the term I would choose. Lord Admiral counted Magos Explorator Vex. The Borg vessels did not undergo conventional destruction. Our auger arrays detected significant warp energy fluctuations at the moment of their disappearance. They did not die, they transitioned. Captain Tiberius nodded in agreement. Brother Chaplain Morid and Librarian Cassius report direct contact with the central node of the primary sphere. In the final moments, it spoke of adaptation and evolution, of the warp offering new paths to what it called perfection. A heavy silence fell over the assembled leaders. The implications were too grave to voice directly. If the Borg collective consciousness had indeed found a way to interact with the warp, to adapt its technological perfection to incorporate the Immaterium's chaotic energy, the threat it posed could increase by orders of magnitude. This information must reach Terra immediately. Lord Admiral Constantine decided the High Lords must be informed. The Inquisition must investigate. This is no longer merely a Xenos incursion. It has implications for the warp itself. As the meeting concluded, Chaplain Morid took Captain Tiberius aside. "There is something else, brother. Something I hesitate to report officially without more evidence. Speak freely, Chaplain. Your experience with these abominations is unparalleled." Morid's skullhelm turned toward the viewport, where the nebula still glowed in the distance. In the final moments of our engagement with the central node, Librarian Cassius sensed something beyond the collective consciousness, a presence watching, interested. Tiberius felt a cold certainty settle in his transhuman mind. One of the ruinous powers, perhaps, or something else entirely. The warp contains entities beyond our understanding. Brother, what matters is that whatever it was, it took notice of the Borg, of their adaptation, their drive for perfection, their collective consciousness, and you believe this entity may have influenced their transition. Morid nodded slowly. "The Emperor protects, Brother Captain, but we both know that the enemies of mankind are cunning beyond mortal comprehension. If one of them has found a new weapon, a new servant, a new path to corruption—" He left the thought unfinished, but Tiberius understood. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war, and now, perhaps that war had found a new and terrifying vector. Months passed. Across the galaxy, the Imperium continued its eternal vigilance against countless threats. Reports of the Borg encounter were analysed, classified, and stored in the most secure vaults of the Inquisition and Adeptus Mechanicus. Special watch stations were established in the region surrounding the Ghoul stars, equipped with aura arrays specifically calibrated to detect Borg energy signatures. On Helios Secundus, Magos Dominus Ezrae continued her research into countermeasures against the Borg threat. The resources provided under Protocol Extremis allowed for unprecedented experimentation, leading to significant advancements in warp resonator technology. Test units were deployed to key Forge worlds and major fleet bases, ready to be activated should the Borg return. Yet, as time passed without further contact, other threats demanded attention. The Endless Orc, WAAGHWWAGHWWAGHWS, the awakening Necron tomb worlds, the ever-present Shadow of Chaos, and the relentless advance of Hive Fleet Leviathan. The Imperium could not afford to focus exclusively on a threat that might never return until the impossible happened. On a remote frontier world called Tantalus IV, a mining colony of no strategic importance, astropathic communications suddenly ceased. Routine naval patrols found the planet's orbital stations abandoned, its defense systems offline. When Imperial Guard regiments made planetfall to investigate, they discovered the colony deserted. 8 million souls vanished without trace of violence or evacuation. Only a single data slate was recovered, containing a message that sent shockwaves through the highest echelons of Imperial command. "We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your vessels. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile." But there was more. In addition to the familiar declaration that chilled the blood of those who understood its significance, the gifts of the Changer have shown us new paths to perfection. Your Imperium will adapt. Your Emperor will be assimilated. All will serve the new unity. In the depths of the Imperial Palace on Terra, the High Lords convened in emergency session. The Fabricator General of Mars attended in person rather than by proxy, an event so rare it had not occurred in centuries. The inquisitorial representative brought sealed data slates containing information so sensitive they would be destroyed immediately after viewing. "The threat has returned," stated the Grand Master of Assassins, his face concealed by traditional hood but changed, corrupted by contact with the ruinous powers. Zine specified the inquisitorial representative speaking the name with careful ritual wards. "The Changer of Ways has found a new vector for corruption. The Borg's drive for adaptation and perfection resonates with his own nature. The Fabricator General's vox emitter produced a sound like grinding gears, his version of a contemplative sigh. The technological implications are catastrophic. The Borg already demonstrated ability to corrupt machine spirits and assimilate Mechanicus technology. If they now have access to warp sorcery as well, we must respond with overwhelming force," declared the Lord Commander Militant of the Imperial Guard. "A crusade drawing forces from every segmentum. Purge this abomination before it spreads, and leave our borders undefended against the myriad other threats we face," countered the Lord High Admiral. "The Imperium is already stretched to breaking point. We cannot afford to divert significant forces from existing conflicts." As the debate continued, with no clear consensus emerging, a figure who had remained silent thus far finally spoke. The Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guard, his golden armour gleaming in the dim light of the council chamber. "This threat combines the worst aspects of technological corruption and warp taint," he stated, his voice carrying the weight of one who stood in the Emperor's presence daily. "It cannot be addressed through conventional means alone." He placed an object on the council table, a simple data crystal, unmarked except for a golden aquila. "This contains authorization codes dating to the Age of Strife. They will activate certain contingencies established by the Emperor himself for threats that combine multiple vectors of corruption." The High Lord stared at the crystal in shocked silence. The implications were staggering. Technologies from the Dark Age, weapons so terrible they had been sealed away for 10,000 years. Forbidden knowledge that the Emperor had deemed too dangerous for general use but too valuable to destroy. "Is the threat truly so grave?" asked the Ecclesia, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Emperor foresaw many possible futures," the Captain General replied. "In some, humanity faces enemies that cannot be defeated through faith and firepower alone, enemies that corrupt the very foundations of our civilization. The Borg, especially now that they have found alliance with the ruinous powers, represent such a threat." The decision was not reached lightly. Each High Lord knew that by authorizing the use of such forbidden technologies, they risked damning the very Imperium they sought to protect. But faced with the alternative, they saw no choice. The crystal's contents were transmitted to select recipients throughout the galaxy. Sealed vaults deep beneath Forge Worlds were opened for the first time since the Horus Heresy. Ancient weapons bearing warning runes and Mechanica seals of extreme hazard were removed from stasis fields and prepared for deployment. And in the void beyond the light of the Astronomicon, at the edges of known space, something stirred. The Borg had indeed returned, but no longer as simple technological assimilators. Their vessels now bore the unmistakable signs of chaotic corruption, their clean geometric forms twisted into patterns that hurt the eye to observe. Where once they had been silver and green, now they incorporated the blue and purple hues of Tian sorcery. The central consciousness that guided them had evolved as well, incorporating aspects of the Chaos God's mutable nature. The drive for perfection remained, but perfection was now defined not merely as technological and biological efficiency, but as the perfect fusion of real space and the warp, the ultimate adaptation on 1,000 worlds. Cultists of Tench performed rituals that weakened the barriers between dimensions, creating entry points for the new Borg vessels. Imperial citizens disappeared by the millions, not killed, but taken, transformed, repurposed to serve the collective. And unlike the original Borg, who assimilated without malice or cruelty, these new servants of chaos relished the terror they inspired, feeding the dark emotions back to their new patron. The Imperium responded with desperate fury. Battle fleets converged on infested systems, virus bombs and cyclonic torpedoes deployed without hesitation to cleanse planets beyond salvation. Space Marine chapters put aside ancient rivalries to fight alongside one another, their combined might still barely sufficient against enemies that adapted to each weapon and tactic. The Mechanicus implemented the resonator technology developed by Magos Dominus Ezra. Now mass-reduced and distributed to major fleet assets, these devices proved effective against the technological aspects of the Borg, but struggled to counter their newly acquired warp capabilities, and in secret, the forbidden technologies authorized by the High Lords were deployed, weapons that could unmake reality itself, devices that manipulated the fundamental forces of the universe, ancient horrors from the dark age of technology, each use of which threatened to corrupt those who wielded them almost as much as the enemy they targeted. The war spread across segmentums, a new front in the Imperium's endless battle for survival. Imperial citizens who had never heard of the Borg soon learned to fear the sound of their approach, the monotonous declaration of assimilation, the horror of seeing loved ones transformed into mindless drones serving an alien intelligence. Yet in this darkest hour, hope emerged from an unexpected source. On a world called Serenus Prime, as a Borg cube descended to begin assimilation, the impossible happened. The planet's surface erupted with living metal, ancient Necromis responding to a silent command. A Necron tomb world, dormant for millions of years, awakened in response to the chaos-tainted Borg intrusion. The cube, for all its adaptive capability, found itself facing technology so advanced it defied comprehension. Gauss weapons that did not kill but unmade, disassembling matter at the atomic level. Tesseract labyrinths that imprisoned sections of the cube in pocket dimensions. Phase shifters that allowed Necron warriors to move through solid matter, bypassing adaptive shields entirely. The Necrons, ancient enemies of chaos from the War in Heaven, recognized the corruption at the heart of the Borg collective. Their response was typical of their kind, methodical, merciless extermination. The cube was destroyed, its remnants collected for analysis by Cryptex, the scientists of the Necron civilization. Similar awakenings occurred on other worlds threatened by the Borg. The ancient Necron dynasties, normally fragmented and pursuing their own agendas, found common cause in opposing this new threat that combined technological assimilation with chaotic corruption. Both were anathema to the Necrons, who saw themselves as the rightful inheritors of the galaxy and viewed chaos as the ultimate enemy. The Imperium found itself in the unprecedented position of tacitly aligning with the Necrons against a common foe. No formal alliance was declared, no communication established between human and Necron leaders, but Imperial commanders learned to withdraw when Necron forces appeared to engage the Borg, recognizing that the ancient Xenos possessed weapons and defenses better suited to counter the adaptive enemy. This unofficial ceasefire extended to other species as well. Craftworld Elar, whose far-seers glimpsed the catastrophic future should the Borg collective fully merge with chaos, deployed their own forces against Borg incursions near their territories. Even the Orcs, while not strategically aligned with anyone, proved troublesome prey for the Borg. The fungal nature of Orc biology resisted standard assimilation protocols, while the psychic field generated by their collective WAGH energy interfered with the Borg's own collective consciousness. The war reached its climax at the Cadian Gate, the strategic choke point leading to the Eye of Terror. A massive Borg fleet consisting of cubes, spheres, and new configurations that defied conventional geometry converged on the heavily fortified world of Cadia itself. Their purpose was clear: to breach the pylons that maintained the barrier between real space and the warp, to create a permanent merger of dimensions that would allow unfettered assimilation of both realms. The Imperium mustered its greatest armada since the Horus Heresy. Battlefleet Obscurus deployed in full strength, reinforced by elements from Battlefleet Solar, Gothic, and Tempestus. Space Marine chapters from across the galaxy answered the call, setting aside doctrinal differences to stand united against the threat. The Adeptus Mechanicus brought their most powerful engines of war, including Titans of the Legio Ignatum, and experimental weapons developed specifically to counter the Borg. Most surprising was the arrival of a Necron fleet led by Anraer the Traveller, a Necron overlord known for uniting desperate dynasties against common threats. No communication passed between the Necron vessels and Imperial command, but their target was unmistakably the same. The chaos corrupted Borg fleet approaching Cadia. The battle that followed would be recorded in Imperial histories as the Assimilation War, though such records were heavily redacted and restricted to the highest levels of Imperial authority. For 3 days and nights, the void around Cadia blazed with weapons fire. Imperial lance batteries and Nova cannons fired alongside Necron Gauss arrays and death rays. Space Marine boarding parties fought corridor by corridor through Borg vessels, while Necron deathmarks teleported directly to central nodes to eliminate key control systems. The forbidden technologies authorized by the High Lords were deployed in full force. Mechanicus vessels activated devices not used since the Dark Age of technology, weapons that distorted reality itself. Vortex torpedoes tore holes in the fabric of space-time. Chrono weapons accelerated time within localized fields, causing Borg vessels to age thousands of years in seconds, their components decaying to dust. Yet still, the Borg adapted. Each weapon proved effective only briefly before countermeasures were implemented. Each tactic worked once before being neutralized. The collective consciousness, now enhanced by Tienian sorcery, displayed a capacity for adaptation that exceeded even the most pessimistic Imperial projections. As the battle hung in the balance, with Imperial and Necron forces gradually losing ground despite their combined might, a final desperate measure was implemented. Deep beneath the surface of Cadia in vaults sealed since the Emperor walked among humanity, Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Cawl activated a device of his own design based on the original resonator technology from Helios Secundus, but enhanced with understanding gained from studying the Cadian pylons. The device did not target the Borg vessels directly. Instead, it strengthened the pylons themselves, reinforcing the barrier between real space and the warp. The effect on the chaos corrupted Borg was immediate and catastrophic. Cut off from the warp energies that now formed a crucial component of their collective consciousness. The fleet fell into disarray. Systems failed, adaptations collapsed. The careful balance of technology and sorcery that defined their new existence shattered. In that moment of vulnerability, the combined Imperial and Necron forces struck with everything they had. Borg vessels were destroyed by the dozens, unable to adapt quickly enough without their warp-enhanced capabilities. The flagship Cube, a massive structure twice the size of an Imperial battleship, was boarded simultaneously by Space Marines of the Dark Angels chapter and Necron Lich Guards serving Henri the Traveller. Fighting separately but with common purpose, they reached the central chamber where the controlling entity resided. What they found defied easy description. The entity had once been humanoid, perhaps even human, but was now a grotesque fusion of machine flesh and warp energy. Cables and meshendrites merged seamlessly with tentacles and mutations that shifted and changed even as they watched. Its eyes, of which it had many, glowed with both the green light of Borg technology and the eldritch blue fire of Tien sorcery. "We are perfection," it spoke, its voice resonating through multiple dimensions. The ultimate adaptation, the final evolution. "We have transcended the limitations of both real space and the immaterium. We cannot be destroyed." "The Emperor begs to differ," replied Supreme Grandmaster Azrael of the Dark Angels, his sword of secrets raised high. "As do the Satan," added the Necron Overlord, his war scythe humming with energy that existed outside conventional physics. They struck as one, transhuman and Xenos, united by necessity against a greater abomination. The Sword of Secrets, a mastercrafted power weapon wielded by Dark Angel's Supreme Grandmasters since the Great Crusade, cleaved through the entity's technological components. The war scythe, containing fragments of the power of the star gods themselves, severed its connection to the warp. The entity's death scream echoed across dimensions, a sound of rage and disbelief as its claim of perfection was proven false. Throughout the Borg fleet, drones collapsed as the guiding intelligence that united them was extinguished. Vessels drifted powerless, their adaptive capabilities neutralized without the collective consciousness to direct them. The victory was complete, but the cost was staggering. Dozens of Imperial capital ships destroyed, thousands of Space Marines lost, 3 Titan legions reduced to a handful of surviving god machines. Even the Necrons, with their self-repair capabilities and advanced technology, suffered losses that would take centuries to replace. In the aftermath, no alliance was formalized between humanity and the Necrons. The ancient Xenos withdrew without communication, their purpose served, their own agendas once again taking priority. Imperial forces began the long process of cleansing, destroying every trace of Borg technology to prevent any possibility of re-emergence. The forbidden technologies used during the conflict were resealed in their vaults, their existence once again reduced to myth and rumour. The official history recorded only that a Xenos threat had been neutralised through the Emperor's divine will and the courage of his servants. But in the highest levels of Imperial authority, the truth was preserved. The Borg had represented something unprecedented, a technological collective that found resonance with the chaotic forces of the warp, the perfect fusion of 2 distinct vectors of corruption. And while this particular manifestation had been defeated, the underlying principle remained a threat. On Helios Secundus, now recognised as the site of first contact with the Borg, Magos Dominus Ezri oversaw the construction of a new research facility. Unlike conventional Mechanicus installations, this one was dedicated not to innovation or production, but to vigilance. Its purpose was to monitor the void for any sign of the distinctive energy signatures associated with Borg technology. "The threat is contained," she reported to the Fabricator General of Mars, "but not eliminated. The fundamental principles of the collective consciousness could emerge again, either through remnant technology or parallel evolution. Then we shall maintain eternal vigilance," the Fabricator General responded. "As we have against all threats to the Omnissiah's realm since the foundation of the Imperium, Ezri accessed her most secure data vault, reviewing the encoded information that represented the sum total of Imperial knowledge about the Prode Borg. The technological principles, the adaptation protocols, the collective consciousness architecture, knowledge too dangerous to use but too valuable to destroy for the Omnissiah and the Emperor. She owned, sealing the vault with the most ancient rites of her order. Knowledge is burden, wisdom is knowing when to set it down. In the void beyond the galaxy's edge, in the darkness between galaxies, something stirred. Not a sphere or cube of Borg design, but something older, more primal, a consciousness that had watched the entire conflict with interest, gauging the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. The encounter between the Borg and the Imperium of Man had demonstrated new possibilities, new paths to power and influence. The fusion of technology and warp energy, of collective consciousness and chaotic corruption, had proven both potent and perilous. A worthy experiment, but merely one of countless such tests conducted across eons of existence. Sench, the changer of ways, the architect of fate, contemplated the results and found them satisfactory. The seed had been planted, the idea introduced. Whether it took root again in a century or a millennium mattered little to one who existed outside conventional time. The great game continued, as it always had and always would. The galaxy burned as countless species fought their desperate battles for survival. And in the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war. Endless, evolving, adapting, perfect in its imperfection, chaos in its purest form.